Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, we are going to stop here so that we can focus on doing a couple other things to help you prepare for your understanding check tomorrow. Things that we definitely need to cover. So, if you did not finish, one thing I will say is this. If you want to come in during your enrichment, or if you leave early and you don't have class to go to right away, or you don't have work to go to right away, as long as I have the MacBook carts, come in and use them. This is the largest class I have. The next class has 23 students, so I would still have 7 Mac, and that's if everyone's there. So I have 7 MacBooks available. The class after that has a maximum of 13 students, 2 of which I've never seen. Usually we only have like 9 or 10, right? So lots of MacBooks available during third block. So if you want to come in and work on this, please do. I'll be more than happy to let you do that. I'll have the MacBooks all this week and I think all next week as well. I need to confirm that I can get them for Friday because I think it's the only day I didn't have. Yeah. So like, that's what I'm saying. If you don't have anything after first block, come in second block and use them, right? I'm more than happy to let you do that. All right. Now, what we're going to do, so go ahead and log out of the MacBooks. Put them, if you want, in the basket underneath your desk, or just push them off to a desk that someone's not using. But I need you to get your textbook out so that we can go to activity 4.3, writing a unique quadratic equation. And that will be on page M1-62. Okay? Please, hopefully, or I hope that we are noticing that this can be really helpful in learning those equations better. Take advantage of MATHia. Hopefully we get done before the class is even over, or the school day's over. Alright. One quick thing I do want to note, when it comes to MATHia, someone in third block made the comment, well, Mr. Kinney, I don't ever want to use the hints because it's just going to slow me down. If you are at a point where you're just clicking through stuff, that's not going to help you learn. What you need to do is take advantage of the hints because it's going to explain things in MATHia. Okay? And when you get it explained, yes, it might slow you down initially, but because you get it explained, you're going to understand it better, which is going to help you move more quickly, and it's going to, on the back end, and it's going to help prepare you for understanding checks and test more. One thing I will re-emphasize is, on the test, you're going to have to solve equations, right? Can you still go back to the stuff with solving equations in MATHia to get more practice? Yes, Mr. Kinney. Thanks, guys, for the response. I appreciate that. The answer is yes, 100%. Make sure you're taking advantage of that to improve your understanding with solving literal equations, quadratic equations, the whole 9. Yeah. Apparently I don't have this clicked on. So, nope, there we go. We're still working, obviously, with activity 4.3, trying to write those quadratic equations because each equation has a different set of characteristics involved, and so we're going to use the features of a quadratic function to write the equation for that function. And so, I believe we already did A yesterday. Does that sound correct? We completed A. We did not start on C in class. Quick show of hands, did you start on C within your small groups? No? Okay. So let's go to 4.3 M1-62, and here's what I want you to do. Remember, I gave you 3 different points. I want y'all to take 30 seconds, figure out which form of the quadratic equation we're going to use. Talk within your small groups. We're going to come back and discuss in just a second. All right, so 30 seconds. Tell me, figure out which form of a quadratic equation we're going to use. I don't hear any talking, but you have no clue which group I'm going to call on. Come on. M1-62. Make sure you can justify. Talk about your group. Make sure the grease. Omar's just being awesome. I can just tell by the way he said it. All right, group 4. Which form do y'all think we should be using? Factored form? Okay, group 6, do y'all agree? Or do you want to push back on it at all? Do you agree?
We agree.
Okay, quick show of thumbs up if you agree, thumbs down if you disagree. Cool, group 5, someone from there, tell me why you think we should use factored form.
Because it gives us 3 points. And factored form got 2 x-intercepts.
Ah, factored form has 2 x-intercepts. Does anyone remember another word for the x-intercepts, or at least this part of the x-intercepts?
Roots.
They're called roots, okay? Just because this will actually matter when we get to the calculator portion and what Miss Courtney's going to start teaching next week, another word for those roots is also called a zero. Anyone want to take a shot in the dark why this is also called a zero?
Because it's an x-intercept.
Okay, look at another part of the x-intercept though. Why is this called a zero?
Because you don't know what it is.
Because the what? Is the y-intercept here 0? Let's work on that language just a little bit.
It ain't no y-intercept.
Okay, so remember, this is an x-intercept, the y value, right? So we need to be careful. Remember, a y-intercept is only where that function intersects the y-axis, right? And that's when the x is 0, right? But the y value here is 0, and so that's one reason why this is called a 0. We'll go into more detail about that later, but just be aware, it's called roots or zeros, right? So the whole point, what's the whole point called?
0. X-intercept.
X-intercept. Remember that y value is 0, that point, that's the x-intercept. It's where the function intersects the x-axis. But there are 2 names for just the x value of that, and those names are?
Zeros.
Roots or zeros.
Why they call it 0 then I'm thinking 0 is supposed to go right there.
So the reason why it's called a 0 is, so let's say I have 3x squared minus 4x plus 8. If I have f of x equals that, right? Well, if I want an x-intercept, what do I know about the y value?
That is 0, 8.
So it's called a 0 because what we're trying to find is what value of x makes this equation equal to 0.
Oh.
And so we're going to get into solving quadratic equations in a later unit, but that's why it's called a 0.
What? That ain't vertex. That's a what's requirement.
Yeah, what form is this?
Standard.
Okay. So, work within, by the way, so don't forget, once you identify the fact that we're going to use factored form, what's the first thing you should do?
Write out the problem.
What do you mean by that?
Write out the factor form.
I'm not even going to fill in with the points first.
No, just write the formula.
I'm going to write that equation out, right? So don't forget, make your life easy. This is something I would do with writing quadratic equations, writing linear equations, writing exponential equations. I'm going to write out that equation first because that's going to help me focus my attention. So work within your small groups, fill in the values that you know. We'll come back together at some point in the future. Make sure that you know what these equations are. Make sure you know how to work with these equations. Really quickly, make sure it's 5 negative 16. Now, before you just start writing here, you need to work some stuff out. Now, where are you getting negative 3 out in front like that? Huh? But what's that negative 3? What's that negative 3 called, y'all? It's a 0 or a root. Remember, this is why we write out our factored form first before trying to fill stuff in. Because where is a root going to go? Where R1 for roots and R2 are. Right? So keep that in mind. I would write out that general equation first.
Did you just write that equation?
Well, we agreed it was factored form, so I wrote the general factored form out. Right. Oh, you're talking about the 3x squared minus 4x plus 8. That was to illustrate a different point. Don't write that down. Yeah. Sorry for that confusion. Be careful with how you write this. What x and then what's that? It's not a comma. You need to look at that factored form again. And you need to make sure you know that factored form. It's x minus r1 times x minus r2. That's factored form. And it should, so don't forget, like, you have these back here. Were you here when we did this at all? Okay, so you have it on a separate sheet. I would get that out and I would use that to help you now. What do you mean?
Like, instead of putting, how do I use X?
But I mean, the x is a variable.
Yeah, that's what X is.
For now, yes. So like, fill in the stuff you know. You haven't even done anything. I gave you that information. Huh? Yes, you do always need to write. What are you just gonna like? I'm trying to help you, and you're getting attitudes because you don't want to work. You gotta work. You gotta write stuff out. Talk with your group if you're stuck. But we gotta do something. What's your question? Well, what do we mean by R1 and R2? Well, remember the R stands for the roots, which is just the x value of the x-intercept, right? So fill in the roots. Thank you. Okay, so let's bring it back just to talk about one small detail, right? Remember, we want to write out this general equation first. What information can we substitute, or should we immediately know we can substitute in right away?
R1 and R2.
We know R1 and R2. Remember, what do I mean by R1 and R2? Those are the roots, which are the x values of those x-intercepts, right? So, and if you look at your graphic organizer where we, not the blue one, but the one we did in the book, under x-intercepts, didn't we write out R1, 0 and R2, 0?
Yes.
We got to recognize that. And so I might even label these as R1 and R2. Noting that's going to help make sure you don't make a mistake, because I saw people trying to put -3 in for A and 1 in for A. Do we know the value for A right now?
It's 0.
It's not 0. We don't know A. That's my point.
Yeah.
What we know are R1 and R2.
You gotta put for we know the X and Y too.
Well, before we get to that, what would I fill in? A times what?
X minus.
X plus 3.
So x minus a -3, which becomes what? Positive 3. Remember, everything with those roots and your h is always the opposite, right? X minus R1 and x minus R2. So then x
Minus 1.
minus 1. I need you to notice, and I told you this yesterday, and you might want to write this note down here. You're never going to be given A when you're given points. If you're just given points, you're not going to be given A. But Anthony was already referring to this. We still have another point, don't we?
X and Y.
So that's an x value,
And that's a Y.
and that's a y value. Can you substitute that into this equation now to figure out what A is?
Yeah.
So let's work on that within our small groups, figure out how to substitute that point in so that we can figure out what A is.
Mr. Kennedy, can I ask a
I
question?
don't have an answer. Hold on a second. What you're doing is you're substituting -16 in for x. Is -16 the x value though? Remember, the confusion is you know that's your y, but remember the whole thing is your y. Right, you substituted f for x, which f of 5, that's my x value, f of 5 is equal to 16.
Well, then-
equals A.
right? So if I substitute a 5 in, I get a negative 16 out. That whole
But
thing
the
is,
process of
that whole
that
f of
was
x is negative 16.
right.
What's up?
Alright, so boom, I got a question, do I multiply these to the other?
Are they being multiplied?
You put
They
five
multiply,
into
we
everything
multiply
but A.
Okay.
So I bring it down, multiply, get two.
You don't just magically get rid of those things.
Yeah.
A times 32,
Oh, yeah, that's right. So whenever
right?
you.
Still being multiplied, so what are you gonna do to figure out A?
Divide.
What are you confused about, Alan? Yeah, the x value is what?
So that 16 is
5.
negative.
So what you're doing right now is you're doing f of 5 equals A times, what is x now? Times 5 minus 1. Now, do you know what f of 5 is? Like if you substitute 5 in, what do you get out? If you substitute 5 in, you get out, well, negative 16. That's the whole point, right? Input of 5, output of negative 16. Now you can solve this equation.
Yeah, that'll be four, no, that'll be eight.
Why did there magically get to be an equal sign in between the A? What's happening between the A and that 5 plus 3?
Can I get you?
They're being multiplied also. What's 5 plus 3?
I had to
8. But notice how what you did earlier was you substituted 5 in for x. You can't just drop off that f of x,
That's 32 times 8 equals
right? See how you substituted 5 in for x? So you substituted 5 in for that x, right there. Do you know what f of 5 is?
16 is wrong.
You sure about that? Because you were given the point 5 comma what? So your input is 5, and when you substitute 5 in, you get, right? Remember, this whole thing is the output.
So you're almost there.
Okay.
Clear A.
At first I didn't have 5.
That's what it is, right? And also, it's more detailed, the 16
Well,
is.
not quite. F of 5 is equal to A times 5 plus 3
Yeah, so divide
times
both sides
5
by
minus
1.
1.
Mr. Kenny, we
But
need to do more
if
than
you
that.
substitute a 5 in, what do you get out?
You're right there.
Look again, look at your point. If you substitute a 5 in, you get out negative 16. So negative 16 takes the place of the entire output.
Okay, so I was right the first time. Okay, so yeah, I just heard you saying something about that.
Okay.
So I had skipped it.
Because out of here, they know it
Yeah,
equals.
and you don't have to do that. That's okay to go straight into there, but some people are trying, I'm gonna talk about both those things. You can skip straight to there, what's up?
It's negative 16 equals A, 5 plus 3, close
Did
to
your
5.
group agree?
That's what you got?
So you would have to replace the F of
You don't have to log in, no, just.
because you're negative 16 is the Y value.
And they'll
still be A. Yeah, A for yourself.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, I want to address a couple of misconceptions that I'm seeing, and I expected to see some of these. So, one of the things I want to remind you of is, we know an x value and we know a y value. Some students are jumping straight to this equation. Negative 16 equals A times 5 plus 3 times 5 minus 1. Where is that equation coming from, right? So they're going from here to here.
We plug it in.
What do you plug in? The
X and
real,
Y.
okay, but I don't see a y value here.
Huh?
I don't see a y, do you?
F
So you
of
plug
X
it in
is
for F of
outside,
X.
so that's Y.
Okay, and so I need you to remember this, that f of x, that whole thing is my output, and y is the same thing as my output. So, can that negative 16 be substituted in right away?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Some students, though, are not starting there, and that's totally fine. But you need to notice, if you're not, you're substituting in a 5 for x, right? It was originally f of x. And what is my x value? 5. So f of 5 equals a times 5 plus 3 times 5 minus 1. Notice I substituted that 5 in for x. And all x's. And if the input is 5, what is the entire output?
16.
Negative 16.
Negative 16.
So can you start here and then get to here as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's your choice.
That's an extra step though.
It shows.
But it's a I would say more precise understanding. Either is fine with me, right? But you're showing me that you understand if the input is 5, the output's negative 16. So it's not bad, right? Are there any questions about how we substitute that x or that y in, or what we're doing there? Okay, so what am I going to do next to figure out what a is?
Solve.
Your parentheses.
So solving, yes, but remember we always want to simplify before we start to use our inverses.
Yeah, simplify.
So
5 plus 3 is 8.
And 4.
times
4.
4. And Anthony brought up this question earlier during the small group discussion. You can't just magically change things. What's understood to happen between the a and the parentheses,
Multiply.
and between these two sets of parentheses?
Multiply.
So it's still multiplying. Notice the equation, equal sign hasn't moved. The multiplication is still multiplication. So negative 16 equals a times.
32.
Yeah, okay.
Now what can I do?
Now you divide 32.
Divide by 32? Does
I was trying to
anyone
divide
remember a different way?
You can,
Multiply by what? 1 divided by 32. Does anyone remember what the name of that 1 divided by 32 is? That's the reciprocal, which is the multiplicative inverse, right? So again, I want you to remember that because that's going to help you with those exponential functions. Instead of thinking about just division, thinking about it as 1 divided by 32, that fraction. We saw that on the understanding check yesterday. And then just use a calculator. What is negative 16 times 1 divided by 32?
Negative 16.
Negative 1/2. Did the calculator give it to you as a fraction?
I got it right.
Yes.
Got 1 over
Wait a minute.
32.
And so,
Yep, negative 1/2.
negative 1/2. So here's the beauty of writing this equation out first before you start substituting everything in. F of x equals, what's the value for a?
We don't know. Oh, negative 1, 2.
Now we know it's negative 1/2, or negative 1 divided by 2. Parentheses x
Plus 3.
times.
X minus 1.
Okay.
So you want us to work them out and be able to write out the form to get A, because you gotta work it out in order to get A.
You have to substitute your values in and solve that equation to figure out what a is. Most of the time.
And so then when you work it out, you don't write that, you just write the.
Well, the whole thing is we're trying to get this equation, and we didn't have a, so I had to substitute my extra point in to figure out a. And once I figure out a,
Then you just put it in.
then I write my final equation.
Okay.
Okay? So this is the equation that would go through all 3 of these points, is the idea. That's the equation that would go through all 3 of those points. Any questions about this before we continue?
Factor form is the easy one to do.
I agree. Factor form is real nice. You don't have to use
not
nearly
hard.
as many inverses and all that stuff. Miss Courtney, can you pass out? Let's go with this one first,
It's easy to identify too.
and then after that one, go ahead and pass out that one.
Pass out which one?
That one first, that's in your hand, and then pass out the writing quadratic equations one. One ones I had you made copies of yesterday.
If it gave you negative 2.
Alright, questions before I continue? Going once, going twice. Sold. Alright, we're going to skip B for the sake of time. Miss Courtney is currently passing out an assignment that I created to help you develop in a lot of different ways. Now I want to point out, if you look at, and I don't have slides on this, if you look at this side, what is this designed to help you do?
The graphs.
Identify what type of graphs they are.
Okay, you definitely need to identify what type of, not necessarily graph, type of function, right? Because we have graphical representations, tabular, all the 9, but also the type of function and what else? What are the directions saying? Write a what? An equation. I'll go ahead and tell you. All of these are linear and exponential equations. This will help you practice and get ready for the test. Hopefully, we'll have time to work on this in class. I want you to look at the other side. So we have practice there for linear and exponential equations, but I want you to look at the other side. What does it say at the top? What's the
Quadratic.
Forms
Forms
of
of
quadratic
equations practice. So that's what we're going to focus on. So notice we are still working with quadratics. This is what your understanding check tomorrow is on. And so we're going to work with this. We need to recognize each form of a quadratic equation. We also need to identify the key features of quadratic functions revealed in each form, and then use the features of a quadratic function in any representation to write the equation. Now, Ms. Courtney passed out a second sheet. We're going to go back and forth between the two sheets. But right now, I want you looking at this forms of quadratic equations practice. I need you to pay attention to this. Identify the indicated values based on the form of the quadratic equation, indicating how you know. Justify. If you cannot identify a characteristic based on the equation, circle that characteristic, indicating you would use a graphing calculator to find that characteristic. Because when I look at this form right here, can I identify all 5 of these characteristics?
Wait, no, you can't.
Was there any form that we identified all 5 characteristics?
Yeah,
vertex.
vertex.
You sure about that?
Well, no.
Look at your graphic organizers from the textbook. Did we do all 5 forms in any of them?
Oh,
No.
no, you can't.
You shouldn't have things written under all of these. That says x-intercepts. H affects the horizontal direction, not the x-intercept. That's
So
all
you
these are about the
just,
vertex.
so whenever you can't put it in, just leave it blank.
Well, I asked you to circle it, indicating you would use a graphing calculator.
Cause you can do concavity for all of them.
Okay, so concavity, you can identify all of them, but I'm saying if I look at this equation, can I identify all 5 characteristics?
No.
So identify the ones you can, and then circle the ones that you cannot, indicating you're going to have to use a what?
Calculator.
Graphing calculator. Make sense? Alright, let's work within our small groups to complete this activity. Talk with each other. You definitely want to work on this before our understanding check tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. No, I never took this for an assignment. I never took this for an assignment. Was it for what?
It'll be
Have you ever found a show we talked about?
But then I went on the switching pages and then don't know. Yeah. The 7 and the 2.1.
That's on the school. I didn't collect that as an assignment.
You don't know what H is, you don't know what the it is.
Okay. That's an active collaboration.
And then.
That's from the graphic organizer.
Not for
Yeah,
the.
that's what that is.
It's not.
So there's a white graphic organizer that
That's
we
what
had.
we're doing it.
Which you may have submitted that, because I haven't re-examined the resubmission. So that may be something that you submitted late, and I haven't gotten to it. So, yeah. There's a graphic organizer that was coming from,
You can't get
which
the actual.
had a lot of concepts from here. It just was, yeah, I never collected that. Hey guys, really quickly, I do want to caution you, I'm not asking you to use the graphing calculator to identify any features. You will not have a